At my birthday dinner, Mom leaned over to Dad and whispered, "Since everyone is here, have your son change the locks at her apartment." My brother quietly got up and left the room. An hour later, he came back pale and whispered, "Mom, someone is there. My name is Sienna. I am 33 years old and somehow still recovering from the trauma inflicted by my family. As a successful corporate investigator, I escaped their toxic web years ago, but I still keep in touch occasionally. Last Sunday, they invited me to a fancy lunch to catch up. Between mimosas and buttered toast, my mother leaned forward, smirking. "Sienna, you know you are so lucky we still have to mention you." Pity works wonders. I just took a sip of coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, deactivated all of the family credit accounts, and emailed the lawyer about seizing their hidden assets. Before continuing this story, let me know where you started reading in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Buckhead, Atlanta, meant being extremely privileged to outside observers. But inside our sprawling colonial mansion, emotional coldness permeated every single corner. Our massive six-bedroom house with its neatly manicured lawn and heated pool was a beautiful fortress of expectations I could never meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale pink at my mother Vivian's strict request, despite my preference for green, became my prison sanctuary. From elementary to high school, I maintained my upright character while participating in elite student councils and advanced classes. None of that ever mattered to them. In my mother's eyes, I was merely the dark-skinned, introverted daughter who completely lacked the vibrant, bubbly charisma necessary to secure a prominent place in her prestigious sorority. She constantly reminded me that my quiet nature was an unfortunate burden to the family's flawless political image. The tension at the dinner table today was suffocating. We were seated in the private dining room of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurant, ostensibly to celebrate my birthday. In reality, this lavish gathering was nothing more than a thinly veiled, highly calculated campaign fundraiser for my father, Sterling Sr. I was a prominent local politician preparing for a grueling mayoral race, and he desperately needed the perfect family optics to secure wealthy donors. The room was dripping with opulence, from the crystal chandeliers overhead to the heavy silver cutlery resting beside porcelain plates. My father sat at the head of the table, projecting his usual booming authority, shaking hands with passing dignitaries and flashing his practiced political smile. Vivian sat regally beside him, draped in expensive pearls and a designer silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. I sat near the end of the long table, observing the entire performance with detached clinical precision. Directly across from me sat my older brother Trey, the undisputed golden child of our family. He possessed the lighter skin and extroverted charm my mother worshipped, but lacked even a single ounce of actual competence or ambition. Beside him sat his wife Lauren. She was a white woman from a wealthy conservative family, and her presence was highly strategic for my father's campaign. Lauren had masterfully weaponized her fragile, innocent appearance to manipulate every situation to her absolute advantage. As the waiter poured another round of expensive vintage wine, Lauren leaned across the table, her eyes narrowing as she looked at my simple, tailored black suit. "Sienna, you are really ruining the campaign family-friendly aesthetic today," Lauren sneered, ensuring her voice carried just enough for my mother to hear. "Could you not have worn something a little brighter, a little less depressing? Your whole dark, brooding energy is completely throwing off the vibe of these photographs. We need voters to see a happy, united front, not whatever it is you are projecting right now." I did not react. I simply picked up my crystal glass, taking a slow, measured sip of my wine. My silence only seemed to infuriate Lauren further. She dramatically placed a manicured hand over her flat stomach, playing her favorite card. "Besides, Trey and I really need to talk to you about your downtown apartment," she continued, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Since you are still painfully single and clearly not starting a family anytime soon, keeping that massive 3-bedroom penthouse all to yourself is just incredibly selfish. Trey and I have a baby on the way. We need that space for the nursery. Your father already agreed. It makes perfect sense for you to move into the basement at the main house. Women really should know how to sacrifice for the greater good of the family." My mother nodded in vigorous agreement, chiming in without missing a beat. "Lauren is absolutely right, Sienna. You only work on computers all day anyway. You can type your little codes from anywhere. We need that downtown address to host campaign events and baby showers. It was precisely at that moment when Vivian leaned over to my father, whispering the command to have Trey go and change the locks on my front door. I watched Trey wipe his mouth, offer a weak excuse about needing to make a quick business call, and hurriedly slip out of the restaurant heavy mahogany doors. Lauren smiled triumphantly, picking up her fork as if she had just won a grand prize. They truly believed I was still the weak, submissive girl who would just blindly accept their abuse to maintain the illusion of family peace. They thought they were ruthlessly backing me into a corner. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking blindly into a trap I had carefully laid out months in advance. The timing was flawless. I cut steak, chewing slowly, let them enjoy their final expensive dinner. In exactly 1 short hour, Trey would return to us, and their total destruction would begin. The heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung open violently, rattling the crystal wine glasses. Trey stumbled inside, looking like a man walking to his execution. His designer jacket was wrinkled, his silk tie askew, and his vibrant complexion had drained to an ashen gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He frantically shoved a frightened waiter aside to reach our end of the table, bypassing his pregnant wife to lean over my mother. He was gasping for air. "Mom," Trey whispered, his voice trembling so violently that the table fell dead silent. "Mom, there are men at Sienna apartment. Men with guns. They have the floor locked down. They are raiding the place." Lauren dramatically dropped her heavy silver fork. It clattered against her porcelain plate. She spun toward me, her eyes wide with manufactured outrage. "Are you serious right now?" she shrieked, her voice echoing. "You have armed thugs in your apartment. We are running a state senate campaign, Sienna. What kind of dangerous criminals are you associating with? Moving to that neighborhood was a terrible idea." My mother, Vivian, slammed her hands onto the table. Her face twisted into a mask of unfiltered disgust. "I cannot believe you would do this to us," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "We give you a prestigious last name pay for elite schooling, and you repay us by bringing ghetto trash into our lives. You are an embarrassment. Your father is entertaining major political donors right now. You are sick." My father, Sterling Sr., immediately went into absolute political crisis management mode. His eyes darted toward the glass doors to ensure no wealthy donors had overheard. "Keep your voices down," he barked, pointing a thick finger at my face. "Sienna, call whoever is staying at that property right now and tell them to clear out. If a single police cruiser shows up, I will personally see to it that you are cut out of this family forever. Fix this mess immediately." I sat perfectly still in my chair. I did not flinch or reach for my phone. I simply picked up my linen napkin, blotted the corners of my mouth, and placed it back onto the table with agonizing slowness. I looked at Lauren, clutching her faux baby bump. I looked at my mother, whose face was flushed with righteous indignation. And finally, I looked at Trey, still gasping for air, clutching my mother chair for support. "Those are not thugs, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm, cutting through their chaotic panic like a sharpened blade. "And they are not local police officers either. They are federal agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, and they are not raiding my apartment because of me." The entire table froze. The silence descending upon the room was absolute, heavy and suffocating. My father lowered his pointing finger. Lauren's mouth fell open in sheer shock. My mother blinked rapidly, struggling to process the words I had just spoken. Trey let out a pathetic, strangled whimper, his knees buckling. "What are you talking about?" my father demanded, his political composure finally cracking. "Why would federal agents from the IRS be raiding your apartment?" "Because your precious golden boy is a sloppy, incompetent criminal," I replied, crossing my arms. "Trey thought it would be brilliant to steal my social security number, forge my signature, and use my downtown address to register 4 separate shell companies. He has been using those fake consulting firms to launder hundreds of thousands of dollars for his failing barbershop business over the last 2 years. I thought he could funnel dirty money through my address and leave me holding the bag when the tax audits caught up." Trey shook his head frantically, tears welling in his eyes. "I did not mean to. I was going to pay it all back. I just needed to float the business for a few months." "You bought a Porsche, Trey," I countered, my voice devoid of sympathy. You booked luxury vacations to Dubai and funded your wife massive designer wardrobe using money laundered through my identity. You thought because I work behind a computer screen all day, I would never notice the massive financial irregularities tied to my own name. You forgot what I actually do for a living. I am a forensic data architect. I build digital security infrastructure for major financial institutions. I catch white-collar criminals before they even realize they made a mistake. My mother let out a sharp gasp, grabbing Trey's arm. Trey, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not commit federal tax fraud. Trey could not look her in the eye. He stared at the patterned carpet, weeping openly. I needed the cash, Mom. The barbershop was completely under. Lauren wanted the new house. I had to keep up appearances. I thought Sienna would never find out. I thought it was safe. It was never safe, I stated coldly. The moment I discovered the fraudulent filings 3 months ago, I compiled every bank statement, forged document, and digital footprint you left behind. I handed a perfectly packaged, indisputable dossier directly to my contacts at the federal level. They did not show up today by accident. I timed the raid perfectly. While you were sitting here sipping champagne and mocking my outfit, the federal government was seizing every piece of evidence hidden in the safe you foolishly stored in my guest room. Lauren's face morphed from shock into pure terror. You turned your own brother into the federal government. You reported him. You are an absolute monster. He is your blood. High as a parasite, I corrected her instantly, not breaking eye contact. And he is looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison for identity theft, wire fraud, and money laundering. I have handed them everything they need to convict him, and I am going to sit back and happily watch him serve every single solitary minute of it. The weight of my declaration hung in the air, heavy and immovable. For a fraction of a second, I thought I actually saw a flicker of genuine remorse in my father's eyes. I was entirely wrong. Sterling Sr. did not care about the moral implications of his son committing federal tax fraud. He only cared about the upcoming state Senate election. The color slowly returned to his face, replaced by a deep flushed red of absolute fury. He leaned across the table, his massive hands gripping the white linen tablecloth so tightly his knuckles turned pale. He assessed the political damage with the cold calculation of a man who viewed his children strictly as assets or liabilities. Today, Trey was a massive liability, but I was the convenient sacrificial lamb. Listen to me very carefully, Sienna, my father growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly register that he usually reserved for intimidating political rivals. You are going to walk out of this restaurant, get in your car, and drive straight to the federal building. You are going to sit down with whatever contacts you claim to have, and you are going to tell them you made a massive mistake. You are going to tell them that those shell companies belong exclusively to you, that you set them up entirely on your own, and that Trey had absolutely nothing to do with it. I stared at him, my expression completely blank. You want me to confess to federal crimes I did not commit? I asked, ensuring my tone remained perfectly level. You want me to hand over my freedom so your fraudulent son can walk away without a single consequence? It is the only logical solution, my father insisted, speaking as if he were negotiating a simple business contract rather than demanding I throw my entire life away. Think about the bigger picture here. Trey is the future of this family political dynasty. He is a married man with a child on the way. A federal indictment would completely destroy his reputation and obliterate my campaign overnight. You, on the other hand, have no real prospects. You are a single woman. You have no husband to embarrass, no children to protect, and your career is just typing behind a screen. You can afford a white-collar conviction. I will hire the best defense attorneys in Atlanta. We will get you a plea deal. You might not even see inside a jail cell, but you have to take the fall today. Before I could even respond to the sheer audacity of his demand, Lauren launched into her highly rehearsed performance. The moment she realized my father was trying to shield Trey, she saw her opening to solidify her status as the ultimate victim. Her breathing hitched. Her hands began to shake violently. Suddenly, a high-pitched theatrical sob ripped through her throat. The sound was so loud and piercing that conversations at the surrounding tables immediately ceased. Diners in the exclusive Buckhead restaurant turned their heads, their eyes locking onto our private dining area. Lauren squeezed her eyes shut, letting perfectly timed tears cascade down her pale cheeks. She weaponized her fragility, instantly fully aware of the power she held in that room. "How could you be so incredibly selfish?" Lauren wailed, clutching her chest and her faux baby bump simultaneously. "You are deliberately trying to destroy our lives because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me and Trey. You hate that he is happy. You hate that we are starting a beautiful family while you are entirely alone. And now you are trying to send my husband to federal prison out of pure spite." She collapsed against Trey, gasping for air as if she were physically suffocating. "I cannot breathe. The stress is too much. You are going to make me lose my baby. You are literally trying to kill my unborn child." My mother rushed to Lauren, side her face tight with absolute panic. Vivian wrapped her arms around her crying white daughter-in-law, shooting me a look of pure hatred. "Look at what you are doing to her." My mother spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You are stressing out a pregnant woman. You are endangering your own nephew. Have you no shame? Have you no basic human decency? Your father is giving you a perfectly reasonable way to fix this disaster, and you are sitting there like a cold, heartless monster." I watched the three of them coddle a woman who was faking a medical emergency to manipulate a political cover-up. It was a masterclass in toxic manipulation. The wealthy woman in distress, the powerful politician protecting his legacy, the image-obsessed mother desperately trying to maintain her social standing, and the incompetent golden child hiding behind all of them. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. "I am not taking the fall for anyone," I stated, raising my voice just enough to be heard clearly over Lauren's dramatic sobbing. "I am not sacrificing my spotless record, my multi-million-dollar career, and my freedom so Trey can continue buying designer handbags for his manipulative wife. My company holds high-level security clearances with federal agencies. A single fraud charge would instantly strip me of those clearances and destroy everything I have built." "I do not care about your little computer business," my father roared, finally losing his political composure. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing a wine glass to tip over and shatter against the hardwood floor. "This family is running a state senate campaign that costs millions of dollars. We have the backing of the most powerful conservative donors in Georgia. Do you honestly think I will let a stubborn, ungrateful daughter ruin my entire legacy?" "You will do exactly as I say, Sienna. You will march down to that federal office, or I swear to God I will crush you right now." The echo of my father's threat bounced off the soundproof walls of the private dining room. He stood towering over the table chest, heaving, fully expecting me to cower under the immense weight of his political authority. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, uncrossed my legs, and looked him dead in the eye. I told him absolutely not. I refused to let his desperate demand dictate my future. I informed him that I would not spend a single second taking the fall for a careless, arrogant brother who could not even run a basic barbershop without resorting to federal crimes. The sheer defiance in my voice caused the veins in my father's neck to bulge. He was completely unaccustomed to the word no, especially from the daughter he had spent a lifetime dismissing. Before he could launch another aggressive verbal assault, my mother inserted herself into the standoff. Vivian stood up, her expensive silk dress rustling sharply in the tense quiet. She pointed a manicured, trembling finger directly at my face, stepping fully into her role as the ruthless matriarch of Atlanta's high society. She warned me that if I did not walk out of this restaurant and confess to the authorities right now, she would personally ensure my absolute destruction. She declared with venomous certainty that she would freeze every single family credit card in my possession by morning. She promised to wield her immense influence to have me permanently blacklisted from her elite legacy sorority, expelled from the Buckhead Country Club, and entirely excommunicated from every prominent social circle in the state of Georgia. She vowed to leave me destitute, a social pariah living on the streets, begging for the very family name I was currently disrespecting. I stared at her, absorbing the absolute absurdity of her threats. And then, for the first time all evening, I laughed out loud. My genuine, unbothered laughter echoed loudly against the crystal fixtures. My mother lowered her pointing finger, her face contorting in sheer bewilderment. Lauren and Trey exchanged panicked, confused glances. My father demanded to know what was so incredibly funny. I did not answer him immediately. Instead, I raised my hand and signaled for the head waiter, who had been nervously hovering near the mahogany doors. He scurried over to the table, holding the leather folio containing the massive bill for the evening's lavish champagne-soaked campaign fundraiser. The total was easily hovering around $15,000. My father typically charged these extravagant dinners to the family's primary corporate account, brushing them off as standard campaign expenses. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored black blazer. I did not pull out a standard bank card. I extracted a heavy, matte black titanium Centurion card, a financial instrument reserved exclusively for individuals with an extraordinarily high net worth. I dropped the heavy metal card onto the silver tray. It landed with a definitive resonant clink that made my brother flinch. I instructed the waiter to put the entire evening on my tab and to add a generous 20% tip for his absolute discretion. The waiter nodded rapidly, his eyes widening at the sight of the ultra-exclusive card, and hurried out of the room. My family stared at the space where the black card had just been. Trey swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I rested my elbows on the table, folding my hands together, relishing the utter confusion painted across their faces. I addressed my mother first. I told her to go ahead and attempt to freeze the family credit cards. I practically dared her to call the bank right this second. Her confusion deepened, her eyes darting toward my father for an explanation he did not possess. I smiled, letting the final layer of my deeply guarded secret rise to the surface. I informed Vivian that she could not freeze the accounts because she did not actually own them. I revealed that the supposedly bottomless well of generational wealth she had been aggressively flaunting to her sorority sisters and political donors for the past 5 years did not belong to my father's failing real estate ventures. The sprawling mansion, the leased luxury vehicles, the extravagant country club membership fees, and the seemingly endless campaign contributions were all entirely funded by a highly sophisticated, multi-tiered blind trust. I let that reality sink into the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room before delivering the ultimate crushing blow. I proudly confessed that the blind trust was solely owned, operated, and funded by my forensic data architecture firm. I had spent the last 5 years quietly subsidizing their lavish fake lifestyle because I knew my father had secretly bankrupted his primary holding company to fund his initial political ambitions. I stepped in through an anonymous corporate proxy to prevent the family name from being publicly foreclosed upon silently bearing the financial burden while they continuously treated me like an unwanted outcast. They had spent years mocking my career, calling me a simple computer nerd, completely oblivious to the fact that my heavily encrypted server contracts with the Department of Defense had literally kept a roof over their ungrateful heads. My father slumped backward into his chair, the horrifying realization washing over his face. He finally understood that the mysterious angel investor who had saved his political career was the very daughter he was currently trying to sacrifice to federal prison. My mother grabbed the edge of the table, her legs giving out as she collapsed back into her seat. The pristine elite reality she had built her entire social persona upon was nothing more than an elaborate illusion subsidized by my hard work. I picked up my phone from the table, looking at Trey and Lauren, who were trembling with dread. With one deliberate tap, I dissolved their financial lifeline completely and cut their funding off for good. Trey pulled his phone from his pocket, eyes locked on the glowing screen. Notifications arrived in rapid succession, pinging loudly. His joint checking account with Lauren was frozen. His business credit line was revoked. The mortgage account for their sprawling estate showed a zero balance. My mother hastily unclasped her designer purse and retrieved her phone, swiping frantically through her banking applications. The color drained from Vivian's face as she stared at the red error messages indicating every luxury account tied to her name had been suspended. The financial guillotine dropped with a tap of my finger, severing the umbilical cord sustaining their lavish arrogance for years. The reality of their sudden destitution hit the room like a shockwave. Trey gasped for air, leaning heavily against the mahogany table, Lauren snatched the phone from his hands, her blue eyes widening in horror as she scrolled through the declined transactions and frozen assets. The realization that her endless gravy train had abruptly derailed shattered her carefully constructed facade of delicate innocence. The wealthy, entitled white woman routine melted away, replaced by a vicious, calculating malice. If she could not manipulate me with tears and fake pregnancy cramps, she was going to resort to the most dangerous weapon in her arsenal. Lauren took a deliberate step backward, clutching her throat, and let out a blood-curdling scream that rattled the crystal glasses on the table. "She is attacking me!" Lauren shrieked at the top of her lungs, flailing her arms wildly. "Trey, get her away from me! She just threatened to hit me!" I remained perfectly still in my chair, resting my chin on my folded hands, watching the absurd performance unfold. I had not moved a single muscle, let alone threatened her with physical violence. But the truth did not matter to Lauren. She reached into her expensive handbag, pulled out her phone, and dialed emergency services. Her voice morphed instantly from a vicious screech into a trembling, terrified whimper. It was a masterclass in the lethal historical trope of white female fragility being weaponized against a black woman. "Please help me," Lauren cried into the receiver, her voice shaking with manufactured terror. "I am at the restaurant in Buckhead. I need police right now. My sister-in-law is completely out of control. She is an aggressive black woman, and she is threatening to physically attack me and my unborn baby. Please send officers immediately." She violently grabbed my hand and ripped my diamond engagement ring right off my finger. She stole my ring and she is refusing to give it back. I am so scared for my life. Lauren ended the call and dropped her phone onto the table, breathing heavily. She slid her left hand behind her back, hiding the fact that her massive diamond ring was suspiciously missing from her finger. She shot me a look of pure venom. She expected me to panic, to drop to my knees and plead with her to call the police back and cancel the report. She thought the overwhelming threat of law enforcement combined with societal biases against black women would break my spirit and force my immediate surrender. What truly disgusted me was not Lauren's predictable racism or her willingness to file a false police report. It was the eager complicity of my own parents. Sterling Sr. did not admonish his daughter-in-law for lying to emergency dispatchers. He did not defend his own flesh and blood against a racially charged fabricated felony accusation. Instead, my father straightened his posture, a cold, predatory smile spreading across his face. I saw Lauren lie as the ultimate political leverage he desperately needed. "You heard her, Sienna," my father said, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. "The police are on their way right now. Armed officers are going to walk through those doors in less than 5 minutes. They are going to see a terrified, pregnant white woman, and they are going to see an angry, aggressive thief. Who do you honestly think they are going to believe? You are looking at serious felony charges for assault and grand larceny. Your corporate clients will drop you instantly when your mugshot hits the evening news." My mother stepped forward, crossing her arms over her chest, fully supporting the orchestrated lie. "This is your absolute last chance to save yourself," Vivian hissed, her eyes narrowed into dark slits. "Transfer the ownership of your company to your father right this second. Reopen our financial accounts and restore our credit lines immediately. If you sign the digital transfer documents before the police arrive, Lauren will tell them it was all just a simple misunderstanding. If you refuse, we will tell the officers that we watched you brutally attack her." They immediately began rehearsing their fabricated testimonies right in front of me. Trey paced the room, muttering that he would claim I had always been unstable and violently jealous of his marriage. Vivian adjusted her pearls, practicing her shocked maternal dismay for the arriving officers, planning to say she tried to stop me, but I was just too aggressive. Sterling Sr. coached Lauren on exactly how to hold her wrist to make it look bruised, advising her to keep crying when the uniforms walked through the door. I did not raise my voice or attempt to defend my character. I leaned back in my chair, smoothed my black blazer, and raised 2 fingers in the air. The waiter, who had been hiding nervously in the hallway, cautiously peeked his head through the heavy wooden doors. I offered him a polite, reassuring smile. I requested that he bring me 1 more glass of their most expensive vintage champagne. I told him I wanted to have a proper drink in my hand while I waited for the authorities to arrive. My family stopped their pathetic rehearsal. staring at me in total disbelief as I comfortably settled in to watch their entire world burn. The heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room swung open with a resounding thud. Two uniformed officers from the Atlanta Police Department stepped inside, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts as they surveyed the opulent room. The absolute second they crossed the threshold, Lauren launched into her highly anticipated Oscar-worthy performance. She threw herself against the nearest velvet chair, collapsing into a heap of dramatic, breathless sobs. She clutched her faux baby bump with one hand and her bare left ring finger with the other, wailing as if she had just survived a brutal physical assault. "Thank God you are here!" Lauren cried out, her voice cracking with perfectly manufactured hysteria. "She is completely out of control." She grabbed me, twisted my wrist, and forcefully ripped my diamond engagement ring right off my hand. "I am pregnant and I was absolutely terrified she was going to kill my baby. Please, you have to get her away from me before she tries to attack us again." The younger officer immediately moved toward Lauren to ensure she was physically safe, while the older, more experienced officer turned his stern gaze toward me. I was still sitting comfortably in my chair, holding my crystal champagne flute, completely unbothered by the unfolding spectacle. Before the officer could even ask me for a statement, my father swiftly stepped directly into his line of sight. Sterling Sr. squared his broad shoulders, puffing out his chest to project maximum political authority. He aggressively utilized his prominent status in the community to manipulate the situation in his absolute favor. "Officers, I am Sterling Sr., and I am currently running for the state senate," my father announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "This is my private campaign fundraiser, and this woman sitting here has violently assaulted my pregnant daughter-in-law. She is unstable, aggressive, and highly dangerous. I want her removed from these premises immediately. I am officially demanding that you place her under arrest for felony assault and grand larceny. If you need me to call the police chief to expedite this process, I will gladly make that phone call right now." The older officer recognized my father instantly. The political weight of the Sterling name in Buckhead was immense, and the officer clearly did not want to risk his career by crossing a powerful local politician. He gave my father a respectful nod before turning back to me, his demeanor hardening into strict authority. He unclipped the metal handcuffs from his leather belt, the sharp clicking sound slicing through Lauren, continuous theatrical sobbing. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to stand up slowly and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, stepping toward my side of the long dining table. "You are being detained under suspicion of assault and theft. Do not make any sudden movements." Trey let out a massive sigh of relief, leaning against the wall as if a heavy burden had just been lifted from his shoulders. My mother Vivian crossed her arms and glared at me with absolute triumph, fully believing their vicious orchestrated lie had successfully neutralized my threat. They truly thought I was going to be escorted out of the restaurant in metal handcuffs, my reputation completely destroyed, and my leverage entirely erased. I did not stand up. I took one final deliberate sip of my expensive champagne and gently placed the crystal flute onto the white linen tablecloth. I held up my right hand palm facing outward, signaling the approaching officer to pause. "Officer, before you make a severe professional mistake that will undoubtedly result in a massive civil lawsuit against the city of Atlanta, I strongly suggest you look at this," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady. With my left hand, I reached into my leather briefcase, resting on the adjacent chair, and pulled out my sleek silver iPad. I tapped the screen, unlocking the device with my fingerprint, and rotated it around, so both officers, along with my entirely stunned family, had a clear, unobstructed view of the high-definition display. I opened the encrypted security application linked directly to the surveillance system installed throughout my downtown penthouse. "My sister-in-law claims I violently attacked her and stole her diamond ring," I explained, looking directly at the older officer. "However, my apartment is equipped with military-grade hidden security cameras in every single room. They record in ultra-high definition, capturing both crystal-clear audio and video 24 hours a day." I pulled the footage from yesterday afternoon, specifically from the hours when I was away at corporate meetings, and Lauren was supposed to be resting in the guest bedroom. I pressed play. The bright screen illuminated the dark, tense dining room. The crisp video showed Lauren standing alone in the center of my luxurious living room. She was not crying. She was not distressed. She was pacing back and forth, frantically speaking on her cell phone. The hidden microphone picked up her voice with absolute clarity. She was arguing with a man on the other end of the line, her tone aggressive and desperate. The officers leaned in closer, watching intently. My father's triumphant smirk instantly vanished. Trey took a hesitant step forward, his eyes glued to the digital screen. On the video, Lauren abruptly ended the call, walked directly over to her designer handbag, and slipped her massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. She placed it inside a small velvet pouch and shoved it deep into her purse. "As you can see, officers, there was no assault," I stated calmly. "And there was definitely no theft. But the video gets much more interesting." I tapped the screen again, switching the camera feed to a shady pawn shop. The footage showed Lauren standing at the counter, handing over her own ring to a private investigator to pay off a massive secret blackmail debt. The entire room fell dead silent, absolutely horrified. The suffocating silence in the private dining room was suddenly broken by the sharp, ragged sound of Trey gasping for air. He stumbled forward, his eyes wide and completely unblinking, as he stared at the paused surveillance footage on my iPad. The image of his fragile, pregnant white wife handing over her massive diamond engagement ring to a greasy private investigator in a dimly lit pawn shop was permanently burned into his retinas. The two police officers exchanged a hard, knowing look, their hands slowly dropping away from their heavy-duty belts. The older officer let out a long, heavy sigh, stepping back and crossing his arms over his chest. He had seen this exact type of elite buckhead drama play out 100 times before, and he clearly realized he had almost been weaponized in a fabricated domestic dispute. Trey turned slowly toward Lauren. The confident golden child persona he had worn his entire life completely evaporated, leaving behind a broken, trembling shell of a man. He pointed a shaking finger at the high-definition screen. "Lauren, what is that?" Trey demanded, his voice cracking violently. "Why are you at a pawn shop on the south side of the city? Who is that man, and why on earth are you giving him your wedding ring to pay off a blackmail debt? What did you do?" Lauren physically recoiled, pressing her back against the velvet wallpaper. Her perfectly manufactured tears dried up instantly. The theatrical, breathless sobbing that had manipulated the entire restaurant just moments ago vanished into thin air. She opened her mouth to speak desperately, searching for another convenient lie, another way to spin the narrative and cast herself as the ultimate victim. Before she could formulate a single excuse, I tapped the screen of my iPad again, closing the video feed and opening a highly encrypted, heavily color-coded financial spreadsheet. "Allow me to answer those questions for her, Trey," I said, keeping my posture entirely relaxed. "You all seem to constantly forget what I do for a living. I am a forensic data architect. I spend my days auditing the hidden microscopic financial trails of international crime syndicates and corrupt federal contractors. Uncovering the sloppy, desperate financial footprints of a buckhead housewife is essentially a warm-up exercise for me. I noticed a series of highly suspicious, recurring wire transfers, bleeding out of your joint checking accounts and directly impacting the campaign funds about 4 months ago. I zoomed in on a cluster of red highlighted transactions, making sure the bold numbers were clearly visible to everyone in the room, especially my father. Sterling Sr. stepped forward, his political instincts screaming that his campaign money was involved. "Your wife has not just been bankrupting your personal savings, Trey." I continued, swiping to the next page of undeniable digital evidence. "She has been actively siphoning tens of thousands of dollars directly from Dad's state Senate campaign war chest. She funneled the stolen campaign contributions through a dummy vendor account she disguised as a local catering service. But the money did not go to any caterer. Every single dollar was deposited directly into the personal checking account of a man named Marcus Vance. Marcus is a 26-year-old personal trainer who works at the exclusive fitness club Lauren visits 5 days a week." The color completely drained from Trey's face. He looked at Lauren, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "You are sleeping with your personal trainer you stole from my father's campaign to pay off your lover." "It gets much worse, Trey," I interrupted, ensuring he heard the absolute unvarnished truth. "Marcus Vance is not just her lover, He is an opportunist. When Marcus realized exactly how wealthy our family was, he secretly recorded their hotel encounters. He demanded a massive payout to keep the footage out of the local media and away from Dad's political rivals. But Lauren had already drained her access to the campaign funds. A local private investigator caught wind of the affair and offered to make the trainer disappear for a hefty fee. That is the man in the pawn shop video. Lauren ran out of stolen cash, so she pawned the diamond ring you bought her to pay the investigator. She then orchestrated this entire fake robbery tonight, hoping to file a fraudulent insurance claim to buy the ring back before you ever noticed it was missing. The complete, irrefutable dismantling of her lies acted like a switch being flipped inside Lauren's mind. The delicate, fragile facade shattered completely, revealing the ugly, rotting core of her true personality. She did not apologize. She did not cry or beg for forgiveness. Instead, Lauren squared her shoulders, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unfiltered malice. She glared at me, her blue eyes blazing with a deeply ingrained, vicious hatred. "You think you are so incredibly smart? Do you not?" Lauren snarled, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous sneer. "You sit there in your cheap little suits, acting like you are better than everyone else. You are nothing but an ugly, bitter, dark-skinned spinster who is entirely jealous of my life. I gave this pathetic family exactly what it desperately needed. I gave you prestige. I gave you a connection to real established generational white wealth. Do you honestly think anyone in my father's country club actually respects your arrogant, loud ghetto family? They laugh at you behind your backs. They take your father's political bribes, and then they make jokes about how hard you all try to act like you actually belong in our world." She spat the final words with utter disgust, proving definitively that her supposed love for my brother was nothing more than a calculated, convenient financial transaction designed entirely to bleed him completely dry while securing her own luxurious, consequence-free future. She simply hated us from the very beginning, viewing our existence as an easily exploitable stepping stone for her greed. Trey let out a primal, agonizing scream that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. He lunged forward, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for Lauren's throat. The betrayal had completely shattered his mind, replacing his shock with pure, unadulterated violence. But before his fingers could even brush against her designer collar, a massive force collided with his chest. Sterling Sr. shoved his own son backward with such brutal momentum that Trey crashed into the edge of the dining table, knocking over a row of expensive wine glasses. The glass shattered, scattering sharp fragments across the polished hardwood floor. Trey looked up at his father, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with absolute betrayal. He could not comprehend. His own father had just physically assaulted him to protect a woman who had systematically destroyed their finances, humiliated their family, and spewed vile racist insults at them. "Have you lost your mind?" Trey yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Did you not just hear what she said to us? She has been sleeping with her trainer. She stole your campaign money. She pawned her ring and lied to the police. She just called us ghetto trash right to your face. Move out of my way." "You will not lay a single finger on her," my father roared, his voice booming with the terrifying authority of a desperate politician. He did not look at Lauren with disgust. He looked at her like a fragile, highly valuable asset that needed to be fiercely protected at all costs. "You are an incompetent fool, Trey. Do you honestly think I care about your broken marriage right now? Do you think I care about her little affairs?" Lauren's father is the primary financial backer of my entire state Senate campaign. His conservative donor network is the only reason I am currently leading in the polls. If you lay a hand on his precious daughter, he will pull his funding tomorrow morning. He will ruin my political career before lunchtime. I will not allow your pathetic domestic issues to destroy my absolute last chance at securing a seat in the Senate. Lauren straightened her posture, a wicked, triumphant smirk spreading across her pale face. She fully realized that her undeniable white privilege and her father's immense wealth had just granted her absolute immunity within our family. She was utterly untouchable, and she knew it perfectly well. My mother Vivian stood completely paralyzed in the corner of the room, her hands covering her mouth, horrified that my father was openly choosing a racist, thieving daughter-in-law over his own flesh and blood just to secure a political victory. My father ignored my mother entirely. He turned his imposing frame away from Trey and marched directly toward the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room. He reached out, grabbed the polished brass lock, and turned it with a loud, definitive click. He then stepped backward, crossing his thick arms over his chest, physically blocking the only exit. His eyes locked onto me, burning with a cold, calculated desperation. The room suddenly felt incredibly small, the air thick with impending violence. "You are not walking out of this room tonight, Sienna." My father stated, his tone devoid of any parental affection. "You came in here trying to play the hero. You wanted to expose everything. You wanted to flex your little forensic data skills and prove how much smarter you are than the rest of us. Congratulations. You successfully exposed a massive hole in my campaign war chest, but you are going to fix it right now." I remained seated, keeping my breathing even and steady. "I am not fixing anything for you," I replied calmly. "Your campaign deficit is your problem. Your corrupt daughter-in-law is your problem. You chose to protect her so you can deal with the severe consequences on your own. You are going to transfer the total ownership of your tech firm into my name," my father demanded, completely ignoring my stern refusal. "You just admitted that your company holds highly lucrative federal contracts. You told us it was worth millions. I need exactly $2 million to replace the funds Lauren siphoned and to secure the final weeks of my campaign marketing. If you sign over the holding company right now, I can liquidate enough assets by tomorrow morning to keep my donors completely unaware of this total disaster. You owe this family for keeping you sheltered and educated. You are going to pay your long overdue debt tonight." I stared at him, genuinely marveling at the staggering depths of his absolute delusion. "You are holding me hostage in a restaurant to extort my multi-million-dollar company. Are you completely insane? I will never sign my life work over to a corrupt politician. You will sign the transfer documents, or I strongly promise you will not leave this room," he threatened, taking a menacing step toward my chair. "You think because you wear a nice suit and pay a few bills that you hold any real power here? I am the undisputed head of this family. I built our pristine reputation from the ground up. I will not let a stubborn, ungrateful daughter destroy my political legacy simply because she wants to hold on to her little computer business. You are going to open your laptop, log into your corporate registry, and transfer every single share directly to my name immediately. If you dare to refuse me, I will personally ensure that every federal agency you work with receives an anonymous, highly detailed tip about your unstable mental health and your close associations with fraudulent shell companies. I will burn your federal security clearances to the absolute ground." I looked at the locked door, then back at my father. I was entirely serious. He was fully prepared to destroy my entire life to save his own. The chilling reality settled over me like a very heavy blanket. The ultimate betrayal was now unavoidable. The click of the heavy brass lock echoing through the private dining room felt like a physical blow, but I refused to flinch. My father stood guarding the only exit, with his broad shoulders squared an impenetrable wall of corrupt political ambition. Vivian had spent 20 minutes trembling in the corner, paralyzed by the shocking revelation of Lauren cheating and stealing. Instead of reprimanding the daughter-in-law, who had just hurled vicious racist insults at our family, my mother bypassed Lauren entirely. Vivian straightened her posture, smoothed her expensive silk dress, and marched straight toward my chair. The look of sheer disgust on her face was not aimed at the woman who pawned a diamond ring to pay an investigator. It was aimed entirely at me. "You have always been the bane of my existence," my mother hissed, her voice vibrating with a decades-old resentment. "From the moment you were born, you were nothing but a massive disappointment to this family. You sit there looking at us with that arrogant, judgmental stare, thinking you are better than we are. You are not better than us, Sienna. You are exactly what you always were. You are a bitter, ungrateful child who wants to destroy her own brother simply because you could never, ever be him." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my hands resting casually on my lap. I deliberately slid my left index finger over the sleek face of my smartwatch. With two subtle taps that went completely unnoticed, I activated the high-definition audio recording application. A tiny red pixel blinked to life on the digital screen, confirming that every vile word echoing in this room was now being permanently captured and uploaded to my encrypted offshore server. I wanted the federal prosecutors to hear the exact tone of voice my family used when they orchestrated their extortion plot. "I am not trying to destroy Trey," I replied, keeping my tone measured to contrast her escalating hysteria. "Trey destroyed himself when he decided to commit federal tax fraud. I am merely refusing to serve a 10-year prison sentence for his incompetence." "Trey is a good man who made a simple business mistake," my mother roared, abandoning any remaining pretense of maternal affection. "He is the golden child of this family. He has the charisma, the bright personality, and the perfect complexion to carry the sterling political dynasty forward. People naturally gravitate toward him. But you have always been far too dark, far too quiet, and far too socially awkward to fit into our world." All my elite sorority sisters had beautiful, vibrant daughters who knew how to smile and socialize with the right political donors. I was stuck with the gloomy nerd who preferred staring at computer screens over securing a proper husband. Her words were meant to shatter my spirit, to resurrect the insecure little girl who used to cry in her pale blue bedroom because her mother hated her natural skin tone. But I was no longer that vulnerable child. I was a multimillionaire forensic data architect, and her pathetic colorism only proved exactly why I had emotionally detached from this toxic syndicate years ago. "So you are protecting Lauren?" I asked, steering the conversation exactly where I needed it to go for the recording. "You are defending a woman who literally just called you ghetto trash to your face. A woman who stole from Dad's campaign to pay off a young personal trainer she was sleeping with. Lauren brings real established pedigree to this family," my mother shouted, pointing a manicured finger at the white woman cowering behind Trey. "She comes from old conservative money. Her father is a highly respected pillar of the Atlanta elite. We need her family wealth and their pristine social connections to legitimize your father campaign. Yes, she made a mistake, but she is giving us a beautiful grandchild who will carry our legacy forward. You are nothing but a massive liability threatening to ruin everything we have worked so incredibly hard to build." Trey nodded vigorously in agreement, completely unfazed by the fact that his mother was praising the wife who had just brutally betrayed him. "Mom is absolutely right," Trey chimed in, his voice gaining false confidence. "You owe us, Sienna. You have been hoarding millions of dollars in your little tech company while I have been struggling. You should have paid my debts from the very beginning. You are going to sign that company over to Dad tonight and then march down to the federal building and clear my name." I looked at the smartwatch on my wrist. The recording was capturing their conspiracy to commit extortion and obstruction of justice with absolute crystal clear precision. I turned my attention back to my father, who was still standing against the locked mahogany doors. "You really think you can force me to sign over my corporate assets?" I asked my father, challenging his arrogant authority. "You think you can violently hold me hostage in a private dining room until I surrender my net worth to cover up your stolen campaign funds?" "I am explicitly commanding you to do it right now," Sterling Sr. stated, stepping away from the locked door and marching toward the dining table. "You heard your mother. Lauren Father will pull his massive financial backing if this scandal leaks to the local press. I face a $2 million deficit in my campaign war chest because of her mistakes. I need that money replaced by tomorrow morning, and your security firm is going to provide it. You will open your laptop right now. You will log into your corporate registry, and you will not stand up from that chair until every single share of your company is legally transferred into my name." Lauren stepped out from behind Trey, a smirk returning to her face. "You heard him," she sneered. "Sign the papers, or I will tell police you assaulted me." Lauren took another deliberate step forward, her expensive designer heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The terrified, tearful victim routine she had weaponized just moments ago was completely gone. In its place was the cold, calculating arrogance of a woman who fully understood she held the most powerful man in the room by the throat. She looked at my father, her eyes gleaming with a predatory confidence. She knew Sterling Sr. was entirely paralyzed by his desperate need for her family political donor money. That realization made her bold. It made her reckless. She turned her vicious gaze toward Trey, who was still slumped against the edge of the dining table, looking at his wife as if she were a total stranger. "You actually thought I wanted to have a child with you?" Lauren laughed a harsh, mocking that completely shattered whatever remaining illusion Trey had clung to. She flattened her hand against her stomach, the same stomach she had been dramatically clutching in fake agony just a half hour prior. "There is no baby, Trey. I am definitely not pregnant. I have never been pregnant. I paid a desperate clinic receptionist $500 to forge a positive ultrasound report so you would finally stop dragging your feet and propose. I needed absolute legally binding access to the Sterling Family Trust Fund, and a fake pregnancy was the fastest, most effective way to guarantee my permanent place in this pathetic dynasty." Trey let out a suffocating gasp, clutching his chest as if he had just been physically shot. The last remaining pillar of his fake perfect life had just collapsed into dust. He looked at my mother silently, begging for her to intervene, to scream at Lauren, to do absolutely anything to defend him. But Vivian remained completely mute, entirely trapped by her own desperate obsession with Lauren wealthy pedigree. "You faked a pregnancy!" my father roared, his political composure fracturing once again. He took a threatening step toward Lauren, his fists clenched tight at his sides. "You lied to this entire family to secure a marriage certificate. You manipulated my son just to bleed my campaign accounts dry." "Oh, save your fake moral outrage, Sterling!" Lauren snapped right back, not retreating a single inch. She crossed her arms over her chest, displaying an astonishing level of sheer audacity. "We all know exactly who you are. You are a corrupt, desperate politician who is currently $2 million in the hole just weeks before the most important election of your miserable career. You do not care about Trey. You do not care about Vivian. And you certainly do not care about your dark, brooding daughter sitting over there. You only care about winning. And right now, I am the absolute only thing standing between you and a massive career-ending public scandal." Lauren walked directly up to my father, invading his personal space with supreme confidence. She was actively extorting a sitting city councilman who was running for the state senate, completely oblivious to the fact that my smartwatch was actively recording and transmitting every single syllable to a secure federal server. "Here is exactly how this is going to work," Lauren dictated, her voice dripping with venomous authority. "You are going to wire $2 million directly into my personal offshore Cayman account by tomorrow morning. I do not care if you have to force Sienna to sign over her tech company. I do not care if you have to mortgage this fancy Buckhead restaurant. You will get me that money immediately. If that wire transfer does not clear my account by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, I am going straight to the Atlanta Press. I will call every major local news station. I will sit down for a live primetime television interview and tell them everything." My father stared at her, the blood draining from his face. "You would not dare," he growled, his voice wavering with genuine panic. "I will gladly burn this entire family to the ground." Lauren threatened, a wicked smile spreading across her face. "I will tell the reporters that your campaign is completely bankrupt. I will show them the financial records proving your son is a massive fraud who launders money for a failing barbershop. I will tell them that you aggressively covered up my affair to protect your political image. My father wealthy conservative friends will pull their endorsements so fast it will make your head spin. You will be a total laughingstock. Your political career will be officially dead before the ballots are even printed." The silence in the room was deafening. My father looked at his golden boy Trey, who was now quietly sobbing against the wall. He looked at Vivian, who was shaking with absolute terror at the thought of a public scandal ruining her high society reputation. And finally, he looked at Lauren, the white daughter-in-law he had just fiercely protected, who was now holding a loaded metaphorical gun directly to his head. Lauren turned her attention back to me, her blue eyes flashing with triumphant malice. "So you see, Sienna, you really have no choice," she sneered, fully believing she had masterfully orchestrated the ultimate checkmate. You are going to open that laptop right now and sign your entire life away. Because if you do not pay my ransom today, your precious father goes down in flames and your entire prestigious family name is completely ruined forever. You are firmly trapped. I looked at Lauren, then at my father, and finally at the tiny blinking red light on the edge of my smartwatch. The sheer volume of federal crimes being casually confessed to in this private dining room was absolutely staggering. Identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, and now the explicit, undeniable extortion of a local political figure. They were unknowingly handing me the precise legal ammunition I desperately needed to eradicate them all completely. My ultimate trap was set. The heavy silence following Lauren's ultimatum stretched until it felt like the crystal chandeliers might shatter from the tension alone. My father, a man who had strength, finally broke. He lowered his head, his broad shoulders slumping under the crushing weight of his own corrupt desperation. He had absolutely no choice. He could not afford a public scandal, and he certainly did not have $2 million of clean money sitting in a personal bank account. He turned his defeated, panic-stricken gaze toward my mother. Vivian was still gripping the sharp edge of the dining table, her knuckles stark white against her dark skin. "Vivian, you are going to have to make the transfer. Sterling." Senior ordered, his voice stripped of its usual booming authority and reduced to a hoarse, urgent whisper. "You need to open the charity accounts right now." My mother's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. She took a rapid step back, shaking her head frantically. She knew exactly which accounts he was talking about. For the past 12 years, Vivian had served as the Supreme Treasurer and Primary Board Director for the Atlanta Elite Women Charity Endowment. It was a massive, highly publicized philanthropic fund explicitly established to provide college scholarships, housing assistance, and community development grants for underprivileged Black youth across the greater Atlanta area. It was the absolute crown jewel of her extensive socialite resume. "Sterling, are you completely out of your mind?" Vivian gasped, her voice trembling violently as she looked around the locked private dining room. "I cannot touch that money. It is a strictly monitored federal nonprofit endowment. There are board members. There are strict annual audits. If I wire $2 million out of that specific account directly to a personal offshore bank in the Cayman Islands, it will immediately trigger a massive red flag. I could go to federal prison for embezzlement." "You will go to federal prison anyway, when the Election Commission finds out about Trey laundering money through his barber shop." My father snarled right back, aggressively stepping into her personal space. "We are entirely out of options, Vivian. If Lauren goes to the press tomorrow morning, this family is politically dead. We will lose the house, the luxury cars, the country club memberships, and every single ounce of political influence we have spent decades accumulating. I can easily cover the digital tracks of the charity transfer once I win the state Senate seat and secure the new municipal zoning contracts. I will quietly funnel city development funds back into the endowment before the end of the fiscal year. No one will ever know the money was temporarily missing. But you have to authorize that wire transfer right this second." Lauren tapped her expensive designer high heel against the polished hardwood floor, checking her flawless manicure with an air of absolute venomous boredom. "I really do not care which piggy bank you have to raid," she chimed in, her tone dripping with intense condescension. "Steal from the orphans, steal from the taxpayers. It makes absolutely no difference to me. But the clock is ticking, Vivian. You always brag about how much power you hold in this city. Prove it. Send the money, or I start calling the investigative journalists at Channel 2 in exactly 10 minutes. The moral depravity unfolding in front of my eyes was genuinely sickening, yet entirely validating. I watched my mother internally weigh her horrific options. On one side of the scale was the future education and livelihood of thousands of vulnerable, impoverished Black children who desperately relied on that endowment money to survive. On the other side was her superficial, fiercely guarded status as the undisputed queen of Buckhead high society. The agonizing internal debate lasted barely 30 seconds. Vivian reached into her expensive designer purse with trembling hands and pulled out her smartphone. She opened her highly secure banking application, utilizing the facial recognition scanner to access the charity master accounts. She was actually going to do it. My mother, a woman who regularly hosted lavish galas, demanding that wealthy donors support the community, was actively preparing to embezzle $2 million of that exact same money, just to protect her cheating, extortionist, racist white daughter-in-law and her incompetent criminal son. She typed rapidly on the digital keyboard, her breathing shallow and remarkably ragged. She was willingly sacrificing the very people she loudly claimed to uplift, simply to maintain the fragile, rotting illusion of our family pristine wealth. "What is the routing number for the offshore account?" Vivian asked, her voice entirely devoid of emotion, surrendering her last remaining shred of human decency. Lauren smiled a wicked, toothy grin and quickly recited a long string of international banking codes. Vivian typed them into the application, her perfectly manicured fingers sealing her own inescapable doom. "The wire transfer has been officially initiated," my mother stated, looking down at the confirmation screen. "It will clear international processing by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Now keep your mouth shut, Lauren. You have your ransom." I sat perfectly still, silently observing the tiny glowing red indicator on my advanced smartwatch. The hidden high-definition microphone had successfully captured the routing numbers, the exact charity account details, and my father's explicit verbal promise to use municipal zoning contracts to cover up the massive embezzlement. I finally had them. I had them all completely and entirely dead to rights. They had just gift-wrapped a federal indictment and handed it directly to me on a sparkling silver platter. The sheer magnitude of their supreme arrogance blinded them to the harsh reality that they were actively confessing to the very forensic data architect they had spent the entire evening brutally insulting. I did not need to fight them with my fists or raise my voice in anger today. I just needed to sit back, sip my drink, and let them confidently destroy themselves with their own monumental, undeniable greed. I allowed my shoulders to slump forward carefully, dropping my chin toward my chest to project the exact image of utter defeat they so desperately wanted to see. I let out a long, shaky breath, intentionally making my hands tremble just enough to sell the performance. My father took a victorious step away from the locked mahogany doors, a cruel, satisfied grin spreading across his face. He truly believed he had finally broken me, that his overwhelming political intimidation and physical confinement had successfully crushed my spirit. Lauren crossed her arms, her diamond-free hand tapping against her arm, looking down at me with absolute, unfiltered disdain. She told me to hurry up, complaining that the stress of waiting was bad for her entirely fabricated pregnancy. My mother remained by the table, staring blankly at her smartphone screen, still processing the horrifying reality that she had just embezzled $2 million from her own philanthropic charity. I slowly reached down into my leather briefcase and pulled out my sleek silver laptop. I placed it gently onto the table, flipping the screen open. The bright, sterile light from the high-definition display illuminated my face in the dim, tense dining room. My father hovered directly over my right shoulder, his heavy breathing a constant suffocating reminder of his immense greed. He impatiently demanded that I log into the state corporate registry immediately and prepare the transfer documents. I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing screen. I opened my highly secure, heavily encrypted web browser and navigated to a complex digital interface that looked remarkably like a standard financial portal. In reality, it was a highly classified proprietary dashboard designed exclusively by my forensic data firm. It was built specifically for instantaneous, secure communication with top federal law enforcement agencies during active high-level cyber threat scenarios. As my fingers danced across the keyboard, typing at a rapid, practiced pace, my father assumed I was frantically signing away my multi-million-dollar empire to save his corrupt political campaign. He began eagerly dictating the specific legal terms I needed to type, aggressively ordering me to list him as the sole majority shareholder and the undisputed chief executive officer of my corporation. I just simply nodded, agreeing to every single ridiculous demand he made, while my hands swiftly executed an entirely different mission. I was actively triggering a severe Level 1 backdoor protocol. With a few highly complex, incredibly rapid keystrokes, I bypassed standard commercial firewalls and established a direct, uninterrupted, and fully encrypted uplink directly to the United States Attorney Office and the regional directors of the Federal Election Commission. I did not just send them an email or a simple digital alert message. I was actively opening a real-time high-definition live streaming broadcast. The wide-angle camera built directly into the bezel of my laptop silently activated, capturing the entire scope of the private dining room. The framing perfectly included my father hovering aggressively over my shoulder and Lauren smirking maliciously in the background. The microscopic microphone hidden within my smartwatch, which had already recorded their previous damning confessions, was now broadcasting crystal clear, live audio straight to the federal prosecutors sitting in their secure offices. But I needed to be absolutely certain the agents watching the live feed had airtight, undeniable legal context. I needed my deeply arrogant family to confidently repeat their horrific crimes right into the live microphone. I stopped typing and looked up at my father, forcing my voice to sound incredibly small, fearful, and vulnerable. I asked him if he was entirely sure this extreme measure would actually work. I asked him directly if forcefully taking my entire tech company would actually be enough to cover up the massive $2 million financial gap Lauren had created by maliciously siphoning his state Senate campaign funds to pay off her young personal trainer. Sterling Sr. did not hesitate for a single second. Driven entirely by his blinding political hubris, he leaned closer to the laptop camera and loudly confirmed every single illicit detail. He stated explicitly that my corporate assets would be immediately liquidated to replace the stolen campaign money before the Federal Election Commission ever noticed the glaring deficit. I then turned my gaze toward my mother, asking her if she was truly comfortable wiring those stolen charity funds to Lauren offshore account. Vivian, completely oblivious to the live federal broadcast, coldly confirmed that the embezzlement was already processing and would clear by tomorrow morning. She brazenly admitted that stealing from the underprivileged Black Youth Endowment was a necessary sacrifice to protect the family from Lauren's vicious extortion threats. Finally, Lauren enthusiastically chimed in, bragging openly about faking her pregnancy and successfully blackmailing a sitting city councilman just to secure her luxurious lifestyle. She laughed directly into the hidden camera, proudly detailing exactly how she had pawned her diamond ring to pay off the private investigator who was threatening to expose her sordid affairs. They were eagerly and proudly confessing to severe federal felonies in real time. They were actively handing the United States government a flawless, irrefutable, and perfectly documented criminal prosecution on a silver platter. The federal agents watching the live stream on the other end of the encrypted connection were undoubtedly scrambling to dispatch task forces and secure immediate arrest warrants. I kept my face entirely neutral, fighting back the overwhelming urge to smile as my father aggressively tapped the wooden table demanding I finish the asset transfer. I looked down at my keyboard, my heart pounding with a profound, exhilarating sense of righteous justice. I typed a few more meaningless lines of code, pretending to finalize the legal documents he so desperately coveted. The trap was set. It snapped entirely shut, locking them inside a prison of their own making. They thought they had finally broken my spirit, but I had just systematically destroyed their entire corrupt dynasty without raising my voice. I gently pressed the silver lid of my laptop down, letting it close with a soft, definitive click that sounded like a final gavel strike in the tense private dining room. I looked up at my father, forcing my shoulders to sag just a fraction more, and told the room that the digital asset transfer was officially pending. I explained that it would take exactly 24 hours for the International Clearinghouse to verify the immense block of corporate shares, but the assets were successfully out of my hands and processing into his control. A heavy collective sigh of absolute relief washed over the entire syndicate. Trey literally slumped against the patterned wallpaper, wiping a thick layer of cold sweat from his forehead. Lauren visibly relaxed her posture, a wicked, triumphant smile returning to her pale face as she confidently crossed her arms. My mother. Vivian finally took a deep breath, slipping her smartphone back into her expensive designer handbag. She fully believed she had just successfully embezzled $2 million from her charity endowment without leaving a single digital trace. Sterling Sr. let out a booming, arrogant laugh that rattled the crystal glasses on the table. He stepped away from my chair, marched directly over to the heavy mahogany doors, and unlocked the brass deadbolt with a sharp, echoing snap. He pulled the doors wide open, gesturing aggressively toward the exit. He did not offer a single word of gratitude for the multi-million-dollar sacrifice he firmly believed I had just made to save his corrupt political career. Instead of thanking me, he puffed out his chest, completely intoxicated by his own perceived political dominance and supreme manipulation. "You are completely dead to us now, Sienna." My father spat, his voice laced with absolute unfiltered venom. "You are officially cut out of this family dynasty forever. Do not call our phones. Do not ever visit the main house. And do not even think about showing your dark face at my massive campaign gala this Saturday night. We have highly prominent conservative donors and major media executives attending that event. I absolutely will not have my flawless political image tainted by a bitter, estranged daughter who viciously tried to destroy her own brother. You are entirely erased from our legacy. Get out of my sight." I did not cry. I did not argue or beg for his conditional affection. I then simply stood up from my chair and slowly straightened my tailored black blazer, smoothing out invisible wrinkles with utmost precision. I calmly picked up my black leather briefcase, securing my laptop safely inside. I walked toward the open doorway, pausing just for a brief moment as I drew level with my mother. I looked Vivian directly in the eyes, seeing the shallow, pathetic relief masking her deep moral rot. I offered her a brilliant, chillingly calm smile. "Enjoy the gala this weekend, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly steady and dripping with unbothered confidence. "I promise you it will be an unforgettable night for the entire family." I did not wait to see the confusion ripple across her face. I turned my back on all of them and walked out of the private dining room, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floors of the restaurant. As I strode down the opulent hallway, I could actually hear the muffled sounds of their premature celebration beginning behind the closed mahogany doors. I heard Trey laughing in sheer relief, Lauren demanding a fresh glass of expensive champagne to celebrate her $2 million extortion payout, and my father loudly boasting about his brilliant political maneuvering. They were actively toasting to their fake hollow victory, completely oblivious to the massive federal avalanche that was currently speeding directly toward their front door. I pushed through the heavy glass exit doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air of Buckhead. The thick, suffocating toxicity of my family instantly lifted from my shoulders, replaced by an intense electric rush of pure adrenaline. I walked briskly toward my waiting chauffeured town car parked by the valet stand. The driver opened the rear door, and I slid into the quiet, luxurious leather interior. The moment the car doors sealed me inside, I pulled my encrypted smartphone from my pocket. I did not need to wait and wonder if my elaborate digital trap had successfully worked. The secure communication application on my screen was already flooded with highly urgent encrypted messages from my direct federal contacts. The United States Attorney Office and the regional directors of the Federal Election Commission had received every single second of the live broadcast. The lead federal prosecutor sent a brief definitive text message directly confirming that the undeniable audio and visual confessions were safely captured and fully verified. Task forces were already being rapidly mobilized to secure the embezzled charity funds and to draft the massive sprawling indictments required for a coordinated, high-profile takedown. I swiftly typed a quick response confirming my personal safety and verifying that I had successfully exited the hostile environment. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest, watching the bright, glittering city lights of Atlanta blur past the tinted windows of the car. My father thought he had masterfully banished me from his elite political world. He thought banning me from his lavish campaign gala was the ultimate punishment for my disobedience. I had absolutely no idea that I had zero intentions of missing that party. I was going to attend that extravagant event, but I would not be wearing a formal evening gown, and I certainly would not be standing on the sidelines cheering for his corrupt legacy. I was going to walk through the front doors of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom flanked by federal agents. The countdown to their total destruction had officially begun, and they were going to spend the next 48 hours blindly marching straight into their own spectacular and glorious demise. The intensely bright morning sun, vividly reflecting off the gleaming glass facade of my massive corporate headquarters in downtown Atlanta, perfectly matched the burning clarity in my rapidly racing mind. I quickly bypassed the busy main lobby, taking the private executive elevator directly to the top floor. My elite security detail had completely locked down the entire surrounding perimeter, ensuring absolutely no unwanted visitors could ever breach the premises. I confidently walked into the sprawling glass-walled situation room where my brilliant team of forensic data analysts was already rapidly assembling. The cold air was practically humming with sharp, focused, and intense energy. We were definitely not preparing for a standard corporate audit today. We were actively mapping out the systematic, absolute destruction of a deeply corrupt political syndicate, and we had less than 48 hours to make the digital execution absolutely flawless. By exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open to admit 3 high-ranking federal prosecutors from the United States Attorney Office. I had successfully worked alongside these specific individuals on numerous highly classified government contracts over the past 4 years. Because my firm routinely handled incredibly sensitive forensic audits for the Department of Defense and the Treasury, my personal credibility with federal law enforcement was considered entirely bulletproof. They did not view me as a disgruntled, vengeful daughter trying to settle a petty family dispute. They respected me as a highly specialized, top-tier asset who had just handed them the most cleanly documented, high-profile political corruption case of their entire professional careers. We immediately got down to work, projecting the intercepted financial data onto the massive digital screens lining the bright walls of the room. The very first major target resting on the digital chopping block was my father's state senate campaign. My lead analyst immediately brought up the highly detailed color-coded web of illicit transactions we had spent the entire night tirelessly tracing. Sterling Sr. had deliberately constructed a remarkably arrogant, incredibly sloppy network of ghost donors and completely fake vendor accounts to mask his massive financial deficit. The live audio confession I had captured at the restaurant was the definitive nail in his political coffin. But the federal prosecutors desperately needed the hard mathematical proof to secure an airtight grand jury indictment. I directly provided them with every single encrypted bank statement, carefully cross-referencing his illegal campaign expenditures with Trey's fraudulent barbershop shell companies. The financial overlap was completely undeniable. He had been actively using taxpayer donations to quietly subsidize his son's failing business and fund his own lavish, fabricated lifestyle. Next, we systematically dismantled my mother's horrific charity embezzlement. The federal agents watched in absolute disgust as I traced the exact path of the $2 million Vivian had wired the previous night. She had foolishly believed that funneling the money through a secondary municipal account would somehow mask the origin of the funds. She severely underestimated the tracking capabilities of a forensic data architect. I showed the prosecutors the precise timestamp when the massive sum exited the Atlanta Elite Women Charity Endowment, a fund strictly meant for underprivileged Black youth, and landed directly in a holding account awaiting international transfer. We had successfully frozen the offshore wire before it could clear the Cayman Islands' banking protocols. The money was entirely secure, but the indisputable digital fingerprint of her attempted theft was now permanently recorded on federal servers. The final, most satisfying piece of the puzzle was dissecting Lauren's sheer, unadulterated greed. The prosecutors listened to the crystal-clear audio recording of her brazenly extorting a sitting city councilman for $2 million. Because she had demanded the funds be sent across international borders using electronic banking systems, she had officially committed severe textbook wire fraud. I handed the lead prosecutor a thick, physical dossier containing every single text message she had sent to her personal trainer, along with the digital receipts from the shady pawn shop where she had fenced her own diamond engagement ring. The sheer volume of federal laws Lauren had casually broken in her desperate attempt to secure the family trust fund was staggering. The prosecutors confirmed that her actions guaranteed a swift, merciless federal indictment. For the next 48 hours, my corporate headquarters completely transformed into a high-speed military-grade command center operating at maximum capacity. We barely slept, surviving entirely on black coffee and the pure, exhilarating rush of righteous justice. My dedicated team worked seamlessly alongside the specialized federal agents, meticulously drafting the sprawling legal affidavits, securing the necessary search warrants, and intensely preparing the complex tactical logistics for the upcoming weekend. The lead prosecutors confidently assured me that the highly coordinated takedown would be executed with absolute uncompromising precision. They eagerly wanted to make a massive, highly visible public example out of my father's blatant political corruption. I agreed completely with their aggressive strategy, requesting only one specific, non-negotiable condition regarding the exact location and timing of the impending arrests. As Friday evening descended upon the city, the monumental task was finally complete. The massive, inescapable digital paper trail was formally submitted, verified, and legally sealed by a respected federal judge. The arrest warrants for Sterling Sr., Vivian, Trey, and Lauren were officially signed and actively waiting in the hands of the tactical strike teams. I stood completely alone in the center of the quiet, darkened Situation Room, staring at the glowing screens displaying the final, undeniable proof of their crimes. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel incredibly small, utterly insignificant, and powerless. They had mocked my career, severely dismissed my intelligence, and tried to violently extort my hard-earned wealth to save their own pathetic, rotten skins. They honestly thought they held all the cards in this twisted game. But as I closed my laptop and walked out of the glass-walled room to head home, I knew I had already won everything. While I was meticulously coordinating with federal agents downtown, my mother was busy orchestrating a completely different type of campaign from the comfort of our family estate. Vivian had always been a master manipulator of public perception, and she wasted no time executing a preemptive digital strike against my character. On Thursday morning, barely 12 hours after our explosive confrontation in the private dining room, she uploaded a highly produced, tearful video to her prominent social media channels. She sat on the plush velvet sofa in her formal living room, positioned in front of a grand portrait of our supposedly perfect family. She wore an understated cashmere cardigan, her makeup applied to look raw and devastated. She stared directly into the camera lens, tears brimming in her eyes, delivering a masterclass in psychological warfare. "It breaks my heart to share this with our beautiful community," Vivian wept, clutching a monogrammed tissue to her chest. "But our family is currently going through a devastating private crisis. My daughter Sienna has suffered a severe mental breakdown. The immense pressure of her corporate job has completely fractured her mind. She has unfortunately severed all ties with us, making horrific paranoid accusations against her own father and brother. We are praying for her swift recovery, but right now we just ask for your grace and understanding as we navigate this incredibly painful tragedy." The video went viral within the exclusive, tightly knit circles of the Atlanta elite. The response from the Buckhead high society housewives was instantaneous and overwhelmingly supportive of my mother. My phone lit up with notifications as her prestigious sorority sisters country club, acquaintances, and wealthy political donors flooded the comment section with prayers and sympathy. They sent massive, extravagant floral arrangements to the estate. By Thursday afternoon, my parents' grand foyer looked like a botanical garden overflowing with expensive white roses, orchids, and lilies. These women eagerly embraced the narrative that the dark-skinned daughter had finally lost her mind. It perfectly protected the pristine image of the Sterling political dynasty. Lauren immediately joined the digital circus. She posted a long, emotionally manipulative message on her own account, accompanied by a picture of herself looking exhausted and clutching her stomach. She wrote about the terrifying trauma of being verbally attacked by an unstable family member. She claimed her doctors had ordered her on strict bed rest because the severe emotional distress was actively threatening her pregnancy. Her wealthy, conservative followers flooded her page with outrage, validating her victimhood and condemning my supposed aggression. She used her platform to paint me as a violent threat to her non-existent child, completely oblivious to the fact that the federal government already possessed the video of her pawning her diamond ring. Trey also chimed in, posting vague inspirational quotes about staying strong through family adversity. He played the role of the stoic, protective husband and loyal son, attempting to garner sympathy from his dwindling barbershop clientele. My security team monitored their coordinated smear campaign, flagging the posts and documenting the mounting digital evidence of their blatant defamation. My lead analyst asked if I wanted to release a brief, carefully worded statement to counter their malicious lies. I completely refused. I told my team to let the social media circus continue without any interruption. There was a profound advantage in letting them publicly dig their own graves. Every single lie they posted would make their imminent destruction that much sweeter. Throughout those 48 hours, I received numerous text messages from former friends and elite socialites who had proudly attended my previous birthday parties. They told me I needed urgent psychiatric help. They expressed deep disappointment in my behavior and formally uninvited me from upcoming charity galas and social events. They blindly chose to protect the corrupt, comfortable status quo rather than question the sudden, highly suspicious narrative my mother was aggressively pushing. I did not block their numbers or delete their messages. I simply ignored the digital noise, sipping my black coffee and focusing entirely on the massive federal indictments currently being drafted. I knew these exact women would be frantically deleting their supportive comments by Saturday night. The sheer irony of the situation was absolutely staggering. While Vivian was recording videos asking for prayers and understanding, she was simultaneously refreshing her banking application, waiting for the $2 million she had explicitly embezzled from the underprivileged youth charity to clear the offshore accounts. While Lauren was posting about the intense stress threatening her fake pregnancy, she was actively browsing luxury real estate websites, eagerly planning how to spend her massive extortion payout. They lived in a completely fabricated reality, insulated by their immense arrogance and blinded by their unyielding greed. They genuinely believed that manipulating public perception would protect them from federal prosecution. By Friday afternoon, the scent of the expensive floral arrangements filling their mansion was likely overwhelming. My mother was basking in the glowing warmth of social validation, feeling entirely victorious. She had successfully spun the narrative, protected her husband's political campaign, and seemingly neutralized her problematic daughter. She was actively preparing for the monumental campaign gala the following evening, fully expecting it to be the crowning achievement of her entire socialite career. She had already scheduled her professional hair and makeup team, selected her custom designer gown, and meticulously planned her grand entrance. I sat alone in my downtown penthouse, quietly looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline as the golden sun finally began to set. I had my own specific preparations to make for the upcoming gala. I was not scheduling a professional makeup artist or planning a dramatic social post. I was carefully pressing my tailored white suit, the exact armor I would wear when I confidently walked into that grand ballroom flanked by federal agents. The digital noise they had created over the past 2 days was nothing but a fragile shield. The absolute truth was coming for them, and it was going to be completely deafening. I stood in my corporate suite. The federal indictments were signed and ready to be executed that evening. My team was running diagnostics on the presentation files I planned to broadcast at my father's campaign gala. Everything was operating flawlessly until my phone buzzed with an urgent alert from the ground floor security desk. My head of security informed me there was a hostile disturbance in the lobby. I knew exactly who had walked through my front doors. I set my coffee mug down on the mahogany desk and walked over to the security monitors mounted on the wall. The camera feed displayed the lobby. Trey was standing in front of the reception desk, his face flushed red. His designer suit looked crumpled, and his posture radiated a desperate energy. He slammed his fist against the thick reception barrier, shouting at the terrified assistant. The 24-hour processing window I had lied about during the restaurant confrontation had officially expired. Trey had spent the entire night refreshing his frozen banking applications, eagerly waiting for the massive influx of cash that was never going to arrive. When his accounts remained locked, his confidence shattered, he was cornered broke and absolutely terrified. I pressed the intercom button instructing my security team to hold their position. I stepped into the elevator. I was not going down there to negotiate. I wanted to look my golden child brother directly in the eyes and witness the exact moment his unearned arrogance completely evaporated. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the chaotic scene. Trey was pacing like a caged animal, barking demands at the security personnel who had formed an imposing perimeter around the reception desk. He spotted me and charged forward, ignoring the armed guards stepping into his path. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, his voice echoing. He demanded to know why the asset transfer had not cleared his accounts yet. He screamed that his credit cards were declining, that Lauren was threatening to leave him, and that my father was furious. He aggressively ordered me to log into my banking portal and manually wire the funds to his barbershop holding account. The sheer entitlement in his voice was staggering. He truly believed he could march into my professional headquarters and command me to hand over my wealth to subsidize his criminal lifestyle. I stopped walking, leaving a gap between us. I stood with my hands clasped, projecting an aura of absolute calm. I told Trey that there was no corporate transfer pending. I explained that I had never signed a single document and that his bank accounts were going to remain permanently frozen. I watched his brain struggle to process the stark reality of my words. The absolute shock widened his eyes quickly, followed by an explosive rage. The bubble our parents had built around him had just violently popped. He realized he was standing in the real world facing a sister who was no longer bound by their toxic family rules. "You lied to us!" Trey roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "You set us up. Lauren is going to ruin the campaign. Dad is going to destroy you for this. Give me the money right now, Sienna. You owe me." He did not wait for my response. Driven by panic, Trey lunged forward, raising his arm in an attempt to grab me. He never made it 2 steps. My elite security team reacted with precision. 2 guards intercepted Trey mid-stride. They moved with the cold efficiency of professionals. They grabbed Trey by the shoulder and wrist, utilizing a maneuver that effortlessly flipped my brother off his feet. Trey crashed hard onto the marble floor, the breath knocked out of his lungs. Before Trey could register the pain, the guards firmly pinned him to the ground, his arms immobilized behind his back. The golden child of our family, the man who had spent his life parading around Atlanta with arrogance, was now reduced to a whimpering, pathetic mess on my lobby floor. He writhed against the marble, spitting out weak threats. The head guard looked up at me, waiting for my command. I did not flinch or show sympathy. I nodded toward the glass exit doors. The guards hauled Trey off the floor by his lapels. They dragged him across the lobby, his designer shoes scuffing against the stone. Trey kicked and thrashed, screaming my name, abandoning any remaining shred of his dignity. The security guards pushed through the revolving doors and unceremoniously tossed my brother directly onto the sidewalk. Trey stumbled and fell onto the concrete, scraping his hands. Pedestrians stopped, staring in shock at the spectacle of a grown man throwing a temper tantrum outside a corporate building. I walked toward the front of the lobby, stopping behind the glass doors. I stood there with my posture straight, watching Trey scramble to his feet. He pounded his fists against the glass, his face contorted in sheer rage. He shouted curses that were muted by the soundproofing. As I watched him, a realization washed over me. I had spent my childhood feeling inferior to this man. I had believed Trey was inherently more valuable and destined for greatness. But looking at him now, stripped of my father's political protection and my mother's financial bailouts, I saw the truth. Trey was absolutely nothing. He was a weak, incompetent man who had relied entirely on his parents' bullying to navigate his existence. He possessed no skills, no intelligence, and no strength. I was merely a fragile illusion propped up by stolen money and a desperate desire for social status. I felt a slight smile touch the corners of my mouth. I turned my back on the glass, leaving Trey to scream at his own reflection. I walked back toward the executive elevator, my mind refocused on the evening ahead. The warm-up act was over. It was time to prepare for the main event. The heavy humidity of an Atlanta Saturday evening did absolutely nothing to deter the city's wealthiest power players from gathering at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead. The grand ballroom had been meticulously transformed into a breathtaking sanctuary of political ambition and elite social posturing. Towering centerpieces of white orchids rested on dozens of circular tables bathed in the soft golden glow of massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in pristine white jackets moved seamlessly through the crowd, offering silver trays loaded with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. This was intended to be the ultimate coronation of my father as the future king of the state senate. The room was packed with influential conservative donors, prominent media executives, and the members of Atlanta's high society. Every single person in attendance was eager to associate their names with the sterling political dynasty, oblivious to the rotting corrupt foundation it was built upon. At the front of the room, my mother reigned as the undisputed queen of the evening. Vivian wore a custom-designed gown that cascaded perfectly over her shoulders, but it was her jewelry that truly commanded the room's attention. She was dripping in diamonds. A heavy glittering necklace rested against her collarbone, matching the intricate chandelier earrings framing her face. She smiled graciously at passing guests, accepting their compliments with modesty. She looked entirely unburdened, blissfully enjoying the sparkling fruits of her horrific crimes. Every single diamond shimmering under those ballroom lights had been purchased using the exact funds she had mercilessly embezzled from the Atlanta Elite Women Charity Endowment. She was actively wearing the stolen college scholarships and housing grants of underprivileged Black youth around her neck as fashion accessories. Sitting directly to her right was my brother Trey. He looked worse for wear. His tuxedo seemed to hang loosely on his frame, and there was a faint bruise forming along his jawline from where he had aggressively introduced himself to the concrete pavement outside my corporate headquarters the previous afternoon. He nervously clutched a glass of bourbon, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy ballroom doors every time they swung open. He was terrified, anticipating the catastrophic financial fallout that he knew was inevitably coming, yet he was too cowardly to warn his parents. Yet the woman sitting beside him showed no signs of distress. Lauren was putting on the absolute performance of her lifetime. She wore a modest maternity dress, specifically chosen to highlight the delicate, fragile nature of her fabricated pregnancy. She gently rested her left hand over her flat stomach, smiling warmly for the flashing cameras of the core. She leaned over to kiss Trey on the cheek, whispering words to him whenever a wealthy donor approached their table. She played the role of the wife with terrifying perfection. She weaponized her proximity to my family's wealth to elevate her own social standing, fully confident that the $2 million extortion payment she had demanded was currently sitting safely in her offshore Cayman account. She truly believed she had won. Suddenly, the hum of classical string music faded away, replaced by the sharp tapping of a microphone. The entire ballroom fell into a respectful silence as all eyes turned toward the grand stage. My father, Sterling Sr., stepped up to the podium. He looked incredibly sharp in a suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He grasped the edges of the podium, projecting an aura that had fooled the voters of Georgia for over 2 decades. The spotlight hit his face, and he leaned directly into the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," my father boomed, his voice echoing flawlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. When I look out into this magnificent room, I do not just see campaign supporters. I see a diverse community united by a powerful shared vision for our great state. We are facing unprecedented challenges in our local government today, challenges that require strong, unwavering, and deeply principled leadership to overcome. He paused strategically, allowing the crowd to erupt into polite, enthusiastic applause. He smiled warmly, turning his gaze toward the VIP table where my mother, brother, and sister-in-law were seated. "I could not stand before you today without the absolute pillar of my life, my beautiful wife, Vivian," he continued, placing a hand over his heart. "She has dedicated her life to lifting up the most vulnerable members of our community through her tireless charity work. And to my son Trey and my lovely daughter-in-law Lauren, who are preparing to bless this family with a new generation. They constantly remind me exactly why I am fighting so hard to build a safer, more prosperous future. Family values, unflinching integrity, and a profound commitment to community upliftment are not just political talking points for me. They are the absolute undeniable bedrock of the Sterling name. The hypocrisy dripping from his charismatic speech was absolutely staggering. He was standing in front of the city's most powerful media outlets, preaching about family values and financial integrity, while actively funding his campaign through massive illegal money laundering operations. He was praising his wife's charity work, while knowing she had just drained the endowment to pay off a blackmail debt. He was publicly celebrating a fake pregnancy orchestrated by an extortionist. I was not standing in the ballroom yet. I was waiting quietly in the dimly lit corridor just outside the heavy gold-leafed doors. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored bone-white designer suit. The cool fabric felt like heavy armor against my skin. I did not need to raise my voice to drown out my father's booming lies. I just needed to walk through those towering doors and let the absolute undeniable truth completely annihilate the entire room. I slowly adjusted the pristine cuffs of my custom suit, rolling my shoulders back. I took one final deep breath, glancing sharply at the dozen stoic, heavily armed federal agents standing silently beside me. We were ready. The heavy gold-leafed doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding, thunderous crash. The lively classical string music abruptly stopped the musicians freezing with their bows suspended in midair. I stepped confidently over the threshold, looking breathtaking and incredibly powerful in my sharp, perfectly tailored white suit. But I was certainly not alone. I was flanked by a dozen heavily armed federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers, boldly displaying the crisp, yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS. A collective echoing gasp swept through the crowded Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Hundreds of Atlanta's wealthiest politicians, elite socialites, and prominent media executives turned their heads in sheer, unadulterated shock. Sterling Sr. froze completely on the grand stage, his mouth hanging wide open. His fingers went entirely numb, dropping his microphone directly onto the polished wooden floor. It hit the stage with a sharp, piercing screech of static feedback that made several front-row guests physically flinch. Vivian sat paralyzed at the primary VIP table, her champagne glass slipping from her manicured fingers and shattering against the floor. The stolen diamonds wrapped around her neck suddenly looked like a glittering heavy noose. Trey jumped out of his chair, his eyes darting frantically between the federal agents blocking the exits and my unrelenting cold stare. He recognized the exact same tactical uniforms that had raided his fake barbershop shell companies just 2 days ago. Lauren sank lower into her plush velvet seat, the arrogant, triumphant smirk completely wiped from her pale face. Her carefully rehearsed, fragile pregnant wife persona instantly evaporated, replaced by the terrifying realization that her offshore Cayman Island extortion payout was never actually going to arrive. She looked desperately toward the side exit, searching for a quick escape route, but two towering federal agents had already moved to secure every single door in the massive ballroom. Absolutely no one was leaving this party early. I walked very slowly and deliberately down the center aisle of the ballroom. The sea of expensive designer gowns and custom tuxedos parted immediately, the wealthy donors scrambling to get out of my path. I did not break my stride or lower my gaze. I projected the absolute unyielding authority of a woman who had just masterfully outplayed the most corrupt political syndicate in the entire state of Georgia. Whispers erupted around me like wildfire as the local news cameras, originally hired by my father to broadcast his triumphant campaign speech, rapidly pivoted their lenses directly toward me. They zoomed in on the tactical federal windbreakers surrounding my tailored white suit, capturing the exact moment the Sterling political dynasty began to violently crumble on live television. I reached the front of the room, completely ignoring my mother, who was desperately hyperventilating at the VIP table. I walked straight past my trembling brother and stepped confidently onto the grand stage, standing shoulder to shoulder with the very man who had threatened to destroy my entire life just 48 hours prior. Sterling Sr. tried to quickly recover his political composure, desperately attempting to salvage the catastrophic wreckage of his most important fundraising gala. He forced a rigid, terrified smile onto his sweating face and stepped toward the lead FBI agent. He nervously laughed, trying to project a false sense of confident authority. He loudly proclaimed that there must be some sort of massive misunderstanding or a highly inappropriate security drill. He demanded that the agents lower their weapons and leave his private campaign event, immediately reminding them that he was a powerful sitting city councilman with deep connections to the governor. The lead federal prosecutor, stepping out from behind my security detail, simply shook his head. He coldly informed my father that this was not a misunderstanding, and it was certainly not a drill. I did not wait for my father to finish his pathetic, desperate blustering. I walked purposefully past the center podium and headed straight toward the sophisticated audio-visual soundboard, controlling the massive presentation screens mounted behind the stage. I pulled my encrypted smartphone from my jacket pocket and plugged a physical adapter directly into the main projection system. I did not need to shout or engage in a messy, emotional screaming match to ruin them. I let the undeniable, cold, hard digital evidence do all the talking for me. The massive, towering screens behind my father instantly flickered to life. The carefully curated, highly edited campaign slideshow featuring fake smiling family portraits completely vanished. In its place, a massive, highly detailed financial spreadsheet appeared, brilliantly illuminated for the entire ballroom of wealthy donors to see. I tapped the screen of my phone, highlighting a cluster of massive, glaringly illegal wire transfers. The federal agents stood completely silently, allowing the devastating presentation to completely unfold. A loud murmur of intense confusion and growing disgust rippled through the elite crowd as they stared at the projected documents. They were looking directly at the undeniable proof of my father aggressively siphoning their generous campaign donations into fraudulent shell companies. I swiped my screen again, transitioning the projection to the most horrifying financial revelation of the night. The massive screens now displayed the exact highly secure routing numbers and time-stamped digital signatures linking my mother directly to the Atlanta Elite Women Charity Endowment. I highlighted the precise $2 million wire transfer that Vivian had anxiously authorized just 2 nights ago. The affluent socialites and influential sorority sisters, sitting in the front rows, gasped in collective absolute horror. They immediately recognized the specific charity accounts. They watched in real time as the digital paper trail clearly showed the funds intended for impoverished, vulnerable Black children being illegally diverted to a foreign offshore banking account in the Cayman Islands. The wealthy donors who had personally written massive checks to that exact endowment began shouting in pure, unadulterated outrage. Vivian buried her face in her trembling hands, loudly sobbing as the women she had spent decades trying to impress turned on her with immediate, vicious disgust. I did not allow the ballroom a moment to recover from the shock of the embezzlement. I raised my hand and the murmurs of the outraged donors quieted down, replaced by a tense anticipation. With one swipe of my finger across my screen, the financial spreadsheets vanished from the projectors behind my father. The background faded into pitch black. In its place, a glowing green audio waveform appeared, stretching across the width of the main stage. The federal agents flanking the exit stood still, hands resting on their belts, prepared for the chaos about to follow. I tapped the play button on my device, routing the audio file directly through the sound system of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom. The sound of Lauren's venomous voice instantly filled the space. The recording captured her absolute confidence as she mercilessly threatened my father in the locked dining room 48 hours prior. Every politician and elite socialite in the crowd listened in paralyzed horror as the white wife dismantled her carefully crafted facade. Her voice echoed off the chandeliers, bragging openly about faking her pregnancy simply to trap my brother and secure permanent access to our trust fund. She laughed on the recording, a cruel sound that made the blood drain from Trey's face. The guests heard her admit to siphoning my father's campaign funds to pay for hotel encounters with her personal trainer. They heard her confess to pawning her engagement ring to silence a private investigator. But the most damning segment of the audio was yet to come. The glowing green waveforms spiked sharply on the projector screens as Lauren delivered her ultimate devastating ultimatum. The entire ballroom heard her aggressively demand a $2 million extortion payment from my father. They heard her order my mother to steal those exact funds from the underprivileged youth charity endowment. She viciously threatened to destroy my father's political career and ruin the family name if they did not comply with her ransom demand by morning. The recording concluded with her vile racist insults calling my family loud ghetto trash, who sought the approval of her father's wealthy conservative friends. The audio file ended with a sharp click, leaving the grand ballroom drowning in a suffocating silence. I looked directly at Lauren, who was frozen in her velvet chair at the primary VIP table. Her blue eyes were wide with sheer terror. The prominent conservative donors sitting just a few feet away from her, including several close friends of her own powerful father, stared at her with absolute unfiltered disgust. She had publicly exposed herself as a ruthless, manipulative extortionist and a blatant racist. The pristine, innocent victim persona she had weaponized her entire life was irreparably shattered into a million tiny pieces. Lauren suddenly leaped out of her chair, her hands trembling violently as she pointed a manicured finger at the towering projector screens. "That is a complete lie!" Lauren shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with desperate manufactured panic. "She is a computer hacker. She fabricated that entire audio file. That is an artificial intelligence deepfake designed to destroy my reputation because she is incredibly jealous of my pregnancy. I never said any of those horrible things. You cannot possibly believe this bitter, angry woman." The lead federal prosecutor stepped forward, entirely ignoring Lauren's pathetic, screeching denials. He adjusted his suit jacket and spoke with a booming, authoritative voice that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. He officially announced that the audio recording was already fully authenticated by federal forensic experts. He confirmed that the United States government possessed the corresponding video footage, bank wire transfers, and digital receipts that perfectly corroborated every single crime Lauren had just confessed to on the tape. He stated explicitly that there was no deepfake, no manipulation, and absolutely no way out for anyone sitting at the VIP table. Sterling Sr. stumbled backward on the grand stage, his expensive leather shoes slipping against the polished wooden floor. He looked out at the sea of wealthy donors who had funded his political ambitions for over 2 decades. He saw the wealthy businessmen shaking their heads in sheer disgust. He saw his most loyal political allies physically turning their backs on him, actively distancing themselves from the toxic fallout of his massive corruption scandal. My father desperately reached out his hands, begging his most prominent financial backers to listen to him, promising he could explain the missing campaign funds. Nobody moved a single inch to help him. They looked at him as if he were a walking disease. Trey remained slumped in his chair, completely broken and entirely defeated. The golden child of the Sterling family finally realized he was absolutely nothing without his parents' illegal financial protection. He covered his ears with his hands, weeping openly like a frightened child, as the reality of his imminent federal prison sentence crashed down upon him. He had lost his fake businesses, his stolen luxury cars, and the manipulative wife who had used him as a convenient, easily exploitable pawn. I stood on the stage looking down at the total devastation I had orchestrated. I did not feel even a single ounce of guilt in my heart. They had relentlessly tried to break my spirit, mock my skin tone, and steal my corporate wealth. They had meticulously planned to sacrifice my freedom to save their own corrupt political dynasty. Now they were publicly drowning in the exact same toxic poison they tried to force feed me my entire life. I unplugged my smartphone from the soundboard, slipping the metal device back into my white suit jacket pocket. The visual presentation on the massive screens faded to pitch black, definitively signaling the absolute end of the Sterling family empire. I turned my gaze toward the waiting federal agents, offering a small silent nod of final approval. The time for digital revelations was officially over. It was finally time for the heavy metal handcuffs. The federal agent raised his hand in a sharp signal. A dozen officers surged into the grand ballroom. Wealthy donors scrambled backward, knocking over flutes to avoid the crossfire. 2 agents ascended the stairs in rapid strides. Sterling Sr. backed away, his hands raised defensively. He shouted he was a city councilman. The agents did not hesitate. They slammed him against the wooden podium. The cold click of steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the dropped microphone. A prosecutor read his Miranda rights, charging him with campaign finance fraud. money laundering, and racketeering. The man who ruled Atlanta was now utterly powerless, reduced to a common criminal on live television. Down at the VIP table, absolute chaos erupted. 3 IRS agents surrounded my mother. Vivian clutched her stolen diamond necklace in unadulterated terror. She commanded the officers to back away shrilly, reminding them of her prestigious sorority status. The financial investigator remained completely unfazed. He coldly informed her she was under federal arrest for massive embezzlement and grand larceny. The horrifying reality finally breached her towering arrogance. Her knees buckled completely as she genuinely fainted, collapsing hard onto the patterned carpet. The agents did not offer a chair. They simply hauled her limp body off the floor and fastened the handcuffs. Lauren realized her extortion payout was gone, and her white privilege could not save her. She abandoned her fake pregnancy entirely, kicking off her designer heels to sprint toward the exit. She did not make it past the first tables. A female FBI agent stepped into her path, grabbing Lauren firmly. She shrieked, flailing her arms and attempting to play the terrified victim one final time. The female agent swiftly pinned Lauren against the wall. She informed Lauren she was being indicted for extortion, wire fraud, and blackmail. Lauren began sobbing, hysterically begging for her wealthy father to intervene. But the conservative donors simply looked away in profound disgust. Trey remained on the floor beside the overturned dining chairs, weeping loudly into his hands. He was broke, publicly humiliated, and facing a massive federal sentence for identity theft. He looked up at me, his face stained with tears, silently begging for a bailout that was never going to come. I did not offer him pity. I adjusted the crisp cuffs of my tailored white suit. I turned my back on the screaming, chaotic syndicate and walked calmly down the center aisle. I pushed through the heavy gold doors, leaving the toxic wreckage of my family completely behind. I stepped out into the humid Atlanta night, sliding into the back of my chauffeur-driven car. I instructed the driver to take me back to my corporate headquarters. Justice had finally been served, and it tasted incredibly sweet. 6 months later, the absolute destruction of the Sterling political dynasty was fully cemented in the public record. The federal court system processed their undeniable crimes with ruthless, spectacular efficiency. Sterling Sr. was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The government formally seized his sprawling Buckhead mansion, his luxury vehicles, and every single cent he had hidden in offshore accounts. Trey received a mandatory 7-year federal prison sentence for orchestrating the fraudulent shell companies and stealing my identity. He cried during his entire sentencing hearing, still pathetically waiting for our parents to magically rescue him from his own severe incompetence. Lauren faced the most brutal, satisfying reality check of them all. When her wealthy conservative father realized she had actively extorted a politician and generated a massive public scandal, he completely disowned her to protect his own corporate legacy. Stripped of her family trust fund and facing severe federal charges, Lauren lost everything. The courts discovered her fake pregnancy and immediately revoked her parental rights to a child from a previous relationship. She avoided heavy prison time by cooperating with prosecutors, but she was hit with a massive civil lawsuit for fraud. Today, the woman who once bragged about her pristine elite pedigree works the graveyard shift as a janitor at a rural gas station just to pay off her crippling legal debts. My mother suffered a fate worse than prison for a woman entirely obsessed with high society status. Vivian avoided jail time through a highly restrictive plea deal, but she was permanently branded a convicted felon. She was officially expelled from her prestigious sorority, permanently banned from the country club, and completely shunned by every single wealthy housewife in Atlanta. The government confiscated her stolen diamonds and designer wardrobe to repay the charity endowment. She currently lives in a tiny, dilapidated one-bedroom apartment in the poorest district of the city. Yesterday afternoon, my phone rang with an incoming call from an unregistered prepaid number. I knew exactly who it was. I accepted the call and listened to the desperate, trembling voice of my mother begging for financial forgiveness. She pleaded for a second chance, asking if I could just send a small wire transfer to help her pay for basic groceries. I did not raise my voice or offer her a harsh lecture. I pressed the end button, permanently blocking the number. I placed my phone face down on the sleek mahogany desk in my corner office. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corporate headquarters offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. My multi-million-dollar forensic firm had just successfully finalized a highly lucrative massive cybersecurity contract directly with the Pentagon. My business partner, a brilliant man who had always supported my independence, walked into my office holding 2 glasses of expensive champagne. We clinked our glasses together in a quiet, victorious toast. They had once told me I lacked the proper pedigree to sit at their elite table. They were completely right. I was never meant to sit at their table because I was destined to buy the entire building, evict the toxic tenants, and build a glorious empire of my own.